board and the directors can be able to align with the strategy in order to deliver. I see he's back. So, Darren, you can hear me?
You can hear me now. Wonderful.
Yes, great.
All I have to do now is work out how to share the slides with you.
Exactly. Just share your screen.
Okay. How do I share the screen on here?
Oh, there's the green place, share screen.
I can't seem to find a button to share screen, if I'm honest. Ah, yes, I have it. I believe. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Can you see anything now?
Not yet.
Any luck?
Not yet.
Oh, that's interesting because I'm sharing the screen. So anyway, just by brief introduction, hopefully while this thing is working. As commented, I've spent over 20 years, 2 decades, working for multinational organizations, primarily in Europe, but I also spent some time working in Asia, Latin America, and then latterly Africa. Hopefully today, when you get to see the slides before we start the conversation, I will give you a brief introduction to strategic planning in organizations and where I see the role of the board and its directors in strategy within organizations. Any look in seeing the screen?
Not yet.
Okay, let me come in.
Joy, can I suggest that maybe Darren can email you the presentation and then you can share from your screen so that we can save on time? Darren, I think you can just send it either on WhatsApp or email so that we can proceed.
Certainly. And who should I send it to Joy or?
Yes, please.
Yes, you can forward to me.
Okay. Right, I've sent it to Joy. Hopefully she can receive it shortly.
As I wait for that, I think you can just proceed. I'll be able to project immediately, get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So with regard to strategy and strategic planning, I think we have to examine whose role is it in terms of strategy and strategic planning in organizations. And before we ask that question, there's another fundamental question we need to answer. which is what is the role of the board in strategy and strategic planning versus the role of management within strategy and strategic planning. Now, there are two effective approaches with respect to strategy within an organization. In some organizations, boards are more proactive in setting strategy. Now, you tend to find this in a more modern or flat organization, for example, where it's a small business, or where the company is owned and managed by the same people, or where the organization is relatively flat or short on resources. And in this circumstance, the board tends to take a more proactive role in setting strategy. Or alternatively, there are certain organizations where the board's role is more reactive in terms of approving strategy. Now, this is in more traditional organizations where it's perceived as the role of the CEO to take responsibility for strategy and strategy development. So, fundamentally, in response to the question, whose role is it? What is the role of the board in strategy and strategic planning? Well, ultimately, the answer is it varies from organization to organization. It depends on the scale and size of the business, the resources available, the historic behavior of the business, the traditions of the business, the ownership of the business. But there are certain situations where even where a reactive board, one that's predominantly focused on approving strategy, may well take a more leading role in managing strategic planning. And we'll discuss that in a few minutes. But fundamentally, irrespective of whether the board is proactive in setting strategy or takes a more reactive backseat in approving strategy, fundamentally, structure is critical. It's important that the business has a process in place which defines the role of the board and its directors in contributing to strategy, in supporting the development of strategy and strategic planning to ensure ultimately the delivery of the strategy for the organization. Because ultimately, there must be alignment in any organization between the CEO and the management and the board on strategic direction. Everybody has to be pulling in the same direction. Now, which of those circumstances where a board that's historically more reactive in terms of approving strategy may take a more proactive role in strategic planning? Well, fundamentally, sorry?
You can see my slides. Just when you're ready, you can ask me to move them. See the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
If you move on to the next slide, please.
All right.
You might have to click through a few aspects. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, so even a more reactive board, whose traditional role has been one of approving strategy, may take a more proactive approach to strategy planning, where there are certain major events in an organization. For example, where there is the planned retirement of a CEO, the organization may well not be aware that that CEO is retiring, because that tends to be very sensitive information. And in those circumstances where the board is aware of this imminent retirement, it may take a more active role in the strategy and the strategic planning process. Of course, where there are unsolicited takeover bids, they have a fundamental impact on the future of that business. And in those circumstances, it's highly likely that the board will take a much more proactive approach to managing and participating in strategy and strategic planning. Where a company has an acquisition, again, that's limited information in terms of to the business in general. So in those circumstances where that acquisition would have a direct and material impact on the ongoing strategy, the board may well take a more proactive approach of engaging and involvement in strategic planning. Or whether there's a major investment. Again, that's another influencing factor whereby it has a material impact on the future delivery of the strategy. And again, knowing full well that major investment is coming up, the board may well, whether its role is traditionally reactive or proactive, take a much more hands-on approach to participating in strategy and strategic planning. Or fundamentally, where there's a drastic decline, whether that be in sales or profitability. Of course, then the board's role is to step in and take a more proactive role in the strategic discussions to ensure delivery of the strategy, to ensure the business is in a position to compete. If you could move on a slide, please. But ultimately, the buck stops with the board when it comes to strategy and strategic planning. And why do I say that? Well, of course, the board is responsible for the direction of the organization. It sets the vision, the mission, and it manages the values of the organization. The board has a duty to the shareholders. By definition, the board is the proxy to the shareholders within the organization, and they are tasked at having the best interests of the shareholders as their primary concern in order to ensure the shareholders receive benefit. And the shareholders are going to receive benefit if the strategy is right and the strategy is delivered. So fundamentally, the board is there to uphold the interests of the shareholders. The board also has a fiduciary duty to the business. It has to act in the best interests of the business. And the best interests of the business, of course, are the sustainability of the business. And the sustainability of the business comes from delivery of the strategy. So again, fundamentally, the buck stops with the board. And ultimately, one of the board's key roles is to review, assess, understand, and approve specific strategic projects and plans which have a material impact on resourcing, whether that be financial or human resourcing within the business. So ultimately, from the shareholder perspective, from the outward business perspective, the buck stops with the board when it comes to strategy and strategic planning. Could you move on, please? Next slide. So fundamentally, when we're talking about strategy and strategic planning, what are we really talking about? Well, of course, we're talking about strategic thinking, where the business, the organization, undertakes a data collection and analysis of the external environment. There are very many external factors beyond the control of your business and your organization that have a material impact on your ability to deliver your strategy and your license to operate, whether that be GDP growth or forecasts on inflation, political environment, infrastructure, competition, major factor externally, free trade agreements. So there are all those factors in strategic thinking that need to be considered. We're talking about strategic decision making, defining the fundamental choices of your organization. What does my organization stand for? What am I going to sell? What does my portfolio look like? What is my business model? That's strategic decision making. And within strategic planning, we've got obviously priority identification. So what are our priorities as a business? What objectives or strategic goals are we setting? How are we allocating resources to deliver on those strategic goals? And finally, we have strategy, execution, and management, which is fundamentally about implementing and monitoring the strategy delivery and taking corrective action where necessary in response to market convictions. So when we talk strategy, we're talking all of those things. And as you can see, the board's role in each of those aspects fundamentally changes. So early on in the process, the board's role or focus is providing guidance, providing advice and counselling on issues, aiding in selection of the process to be followed, contributing different perspectives, adding value with respect to competitive analysis. Later on in the discussion, in the strategic process, the board's role becomes one which is more evaluative and decision-making. And then finally, the board's focus becomes more targeted on delivering and reviewing and monitoring the strategy as it's implemented to ensure that it delivers for the business. Next slide, please. But there are some fundamental roles that the board takes in the strategy process in terms of strategic planning, whether they're proactive in setting strategy or more reactive in approving strategy. Because the board's role is fundamentally to agree the vision. So restate or reconfirm the company's vision, articulate that vision so that it has interest and is engaging for not just the business, but the employees, the suppliers, the shareholders, for all of the stakeholders in the business. The board has also a role to play in reviewing the opportunity space. So analysing the full array of strategic options that are available to the business, whether that be talking about something as diverse as emerging markets or new and available technologies, looking at customer needs, consumer profiling. All of those aspects are, to some extent, the remit of the board. The board also has a role to play in assessing the business design and internal capabilities. So what do we mean by that? Well, this is an inward-looking role that the board takes, looking at the organization, looking at its strengths and weaknesses and its capabilities to ensure that it maximizes the strengths, mitigates and manages the risks, and utilizes its capabilities as efficiently and effectively as possible. The board also has a role to play in determining strategic intent. And the purpose of this is fundamentally to identify the most attractive opportunities for their vision and the capabilities of the organization it's identified. And then the board has a role to play in developing the business design prototypes. What do we mean by that? This is a more externally focused role of the board, to look outside of the business, to look at similar businesses within the marketplace and identify the areas, the comparison and the contrasts between your business design and the business designs of those similar businesses, to identify opportunities to increase effectiveness and efficiency. Now, I know this may seem slightly obtuse, but I can assure you from a multinational perspective, many multinationals compare their business models to those of other multinationals. So, for example, Diageo, Unilever, BAT are constantly comparing their design models to sense check their effectiveness and efficiency as organizations. If you could move on to the next slide, please, John. But what do we need to do to achieve that? Well, basically that involves the board playing a role in analysing the external business environment. And that may be using a particular framework like PESTLE or Porter's Five Forces. It also involves the board being involved in that internal analysis, whether that be via a SWOT analysis or a gap analysis, And of course, as I just mentioned, it involves looking externally at those comparative companies and contrasting your business model. What is out there? What is the most effective and efficient business model for my business? And this requires data collection, it requires analysis, and it requires collaboration between the board and its directors with the CEO, the management of the organization, and the FD. If you could move on one, please. And another role that's fundamental to the board is ensuring that strategy is up front and center, a regular item on the board agenda, not just in terms of monitoring the progress of the delivery of the strategy, but also having the ability to look and assess and understand any particular issues, opportunities, or additional risks that have emerged since the development and the implementation of the strategy, so that if necessary, they can pivot and change direction slightly to enable the strategy to deliver. Next slide, please. So, what does a board need to be effective at oversight in the strategic planning process? This is quite a busy slide, but I think it's an important one. The organization needs to ensure that the board composition is connected to the strategy. What I mean there is the members of the board need to have the appropriate skill set, knowledge, and experience to be able to contribute to that strategic discussion, whether their strength is competition, business in general, finance, planning. They need to have a requisite skill set whereby they can contribute to the development and implementation and monitoring of that strategy. The board also need to challenge the balance, the short term and the long term. Now, this is more challenging than you would imagine, because in the short term, there are risks and opportunities that arise in a business that may have a material impact on your long-term ambition, your long-term strategy. So the board's role is as a meter to balance those short-term risks and opportunities to ensure they don't materially impact in a negative way the long-term ambition or the long-term strategy. Of course, the board need also to find the right frequency for discussions on strategy, because strategy is an ongoing part, a fundamental part of the business. So as a consequence of that, it needs to be a regular item on the agenda. The board's role is to measure progress in terms of delivery of the strategy and know when to pivot. And that's not just about the day-to-day strategic intent of the business. That's also when strategizing with respect to crisis management. Because in business, there are always crises. And the board has a role to play in strategizing how to manage those particular crises as they arise. The board needs information from the management. So the board needs to do its homework to determine what is the best information they need to best manage and monitor the delivery of the strategy. They need to be capable of challenging management assumptions. This is a fundamental role of the board, because all of the strategic plans to deliver on the strategy are developed on a series of assumptions. Now, it's the board's role to challenge those assumptions, to ensure that ultimately the strategic plans that are developed are robust and are reflective of the current market conditions. Now, risk, the other side of strategy coin, as it says there. The board's role is to oversee and monitor risk within the business, so that those risks that exist to the delivery of the strategy. So whether that be through an enterprise risk management system or a risk register, the board have to have oversight of the risks and be confident that the mitigations put in place by the business manage those risks effectively so they don't undermine the delivery of the strategy. The board has to play the disruption game, both offensive and defensive. What do we mean by disruption game? They need to be thinking about what can we do to disrupt the market, whether it's, I don't know, years gone by, the introduction of the smartphone. How can we disrupt the competition and enable the delivery of the strategy? But they also need to be thinking, how can we be disrupted? And once they've identified those potential disruptions, add them to your risk register so that you're monitoring and managing those risks. Their role is also as a check and balance for executive compensation to make sure the performance targets and any incentive plans that an organization has put in place to deliver those performance targets are all aligned to the delivery of the strategy. And finally, their role is to fundamentally to engage shareholders about the strategy. Their role is key to linking the shareholder to the organization, to ensure the shareholder has an understanding of the strategy and buys into the strategy. Because without the shareholder, the business is suffering. So in summary, with respect to strategy and planning, what is the role of the board? Well, we need the right board members for the role. They need to have the requisite skill set, knowledge, experience to be able to contribute to that strategy. There needs to be clear guidelines and expectations for board members in terms of what is their role in strategy and strategic planning. There needs to be an outline of the duties of the directors so that they can be held accountable for their actions and their performance. And they should be under performance reviews. Strategy should be a regular agenda item for the board. They need to be able to choose metrics and monitor the progress of the delivery of the strategy. They also, from time to time, are responsible for reviewing the strategy to identify any risks, opportunities, issues that we mentioned earlier that may impact on the delivery of the strategy. And they need to be able to review that strategy in order to allocate resources and funds effectively to deliver on that strategy. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, in summary of roles, the board's role, they're responsible for setting the organization's overall direction and ensuring that it's aligned to the vision, to the mission, and the values of the organization. The board is there to provide oversight and accountability, to ensure that management takes action to achieve the desired results and deliver on the strategy. They should provide guidance on the general direction of the company and oversee the strategic priorities with a view to ensuring that those strategic priorities and direction are realistic and are achievable. The management of the company, well, their job is day-to-day operations of the business and ensuring that all activities are carried out in line with the board's direction. Their job is to do the detailed planning in order to achieve the goals that have been set. And their role is to keep the board updated on progress of delivery of the strategy. Clearly from this, you can see that the board's role is fundamental in ensuring the sustainability and growth of the organization. Without the board's guidance and input, the organization is at risk of falling behind its competition. But in order to do that, as I mentioned earlier, the board needs the required knowledge, skills, and experience necessary to provide that adequate oversight and guidance. But fundamentally, developing, implementing, and monitoring the strategy requires close collaboration, constant collaboration between the board and the management of an organization. And I think that's all I've got to say for now. Hopefully that's giving you some food for thought. The role of the board is fundamental in an organization, but it needs to be very clear what the role of the board is. That needs to be in a memorandum or in the Articles of Association. And irrespective of that, without the board's input and guidance, there is a risk that that business will become uncompetitive. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Darren. Thank you for that very precise presentation. We'll welcome the CEO to just give a few remarks before we can take in questions. You can either put in your questions in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand. We'll be able to call you out to be able to speak out. Thank you, and karibu, Bwana Mashak.
Thank you, Joy. And Darren, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. Members, as I believe we are aware, this has been a very brief overview of the role of the board. Of course, we are aware that we can be able to get more information when we attend the detailed program. But Joy, I'm happy, and I would like to invite members to share their comments and questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Meshach. There's a comment from John Paul Makoni. Thank you for the presentation. It is most appreciated. Do you see as the biggest challenge in board oversight of the strategy process? What do you see as the biggest challenge in board oversight of the strategy process?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you, John. For me, there are a couple of key challenges. The one is the communication between the board and management. There needs to be significant collaboration between the board and management. And the board needs to be very clear in terms of its expectations of management in order to have effective oversight of the strategy process. But all of that stems from having a very clear and documented direction of the role of the board in the strategy process. Without that, the board is either acting outside the remit of its responsibility, or it's not clear, and it can create a clash between the CEO and the management and the rest of the board membership. So I think it's having a clear mandate for its role in the strategy process and oversight, and being very clear and doing its homework on what it needs in order to better have the best oversight it can possibly have to monitor the strategy process. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. From Alex Okot, thanks for the excellent presentation. For Darren, how regularly should a long-term strategic plan, 5-year, be reviewed?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I think I mentioned it on a couple of occasions. Certainly strategy should be a regular agenda item, and it's about monitoring and assessing performance. But there's certainly an aspect where an organization should take time out on a regular basis to revisit the strategy per se. Given that there are constant changing market conditions, there are new issues arising, new opportunities, new risks to the business. So I would, for me, maybe you do, depending on the nature of the business and the scale and size and scope, you may do that on a 6-monthly or annual basis. Take some specific time out to undertake a full review of the strategy plan based on the new market conditions or based on certain criteria within the company. But fundamentally, if the business significantly changes through that 5-year plan, it should certainly be undertaken at that point. So, for example, if a business undertakes a big acquisition or makes a new investment, or there's a new significant competitor in the market, then the business should be able to flex enough to take that time out at that particular juncture to undertake a strategic review. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, thank you. From Agnes, thanks for the presentation. Is this VUCA or BANI environment? Which tools can the board, which tools can the board leverage to clarify the vision and objectives?
Oh, crikey, right. In terms of vision and objectives, well, the objectives will be set based on the strategic direction of the company. So once you know what you want to achieve, you've examined the internal and external environment of your business, then you should be able to set very clear strategic goals or objectives for the business. So it's about scanning, horizon scanning, environment scanning, in both internal and external, determining the direction of the company, which should then drive out a set of specific objectives to achieve that strategy, that vision. In terms of tools that can be leveraged, and in terms of those, there are various tools that you can use to enable you to gather that information on the horizon, on the external environment and the internal analysis. So, for example, I mentioned there are various tools for defining the external environment. So you can use, there's a model called PESTLE, there's a model called Porter's 5 Forces, which helps you identify those external factors that have an influence on your business. In terms of internally, there's a long list of particular tools that could be used, whether it be something as simple as a SWOT analysis or a gap analysis or a core competency analysis. These are everyday available tools that you can utilize that will provide you with the information on the external environment, which will then feed your strategy evolution once you know the direction of the company. In terms of vision, well, the vision and mission come hand in hand, and I think that's a specific piece of work that the board can undertake jointly, collaboratively with management. Or there have been circumstances that I'm aware of where businesses have employed external consultants to help manage that process of clarifying or articulating the vision. So there are plenty of tools out there that can be utilized in terms of clarifying your vision and defining your objectives.
Okay. From Dirangu, a very rich presentation. How can strategy implementation conflict between the board and the management be solved?
Well, hopefully we never get to the issue of conflict. And as you say, that stems from my earlier comment with regard to being very clear in terms of the role of the board, and having that clearly articulated and written down, but also a very positive relationship between the board and the CEO of the organization. But if there is conflict, I think then it's a matter of the organization sitting down, so the CEO and the FD maybe, or the senior management of the organization with the board to resolve those issues. Or it can well be the board holds a session where it determines, if this isn't already written down or established within the memorandum of understanding, the articles of association, that the board sits down and determines what it believes its role to be, and then makes a proposition to include that in the articles. Because I think it's all about having clarity in terms of the roles of the board versus management. And I think I started with that on the first slide. Clarity between those two organizations is essential, and a good working relationship is essential. So the board should take its time to get to understand and know the management, and have a good platform for communication with management, because that will ease some of the issues should they arise. So it's about communication, it's about clarity. When there is conflict, it's about coming to some consensus or agreement, or re-establishing in articles of association the role of the board vis-a-vis the management.
Okay. From Edgar K. Mutai. Thank you, Darren, for the presentation. It helps to refresh and realign board mandates in light of challenges in the 21st century faced by new boards. Thank you for that comment. From Martin Mutuku, Darren, thanks for the insightful presentation. Could you speak to specific roles for both the board chair versus, sorry, I can't see that bit. Yeah, versus CEO on strategy, from initiating its formulation to oversight on implementation?
Yes, that's an interesting question. Thank you for that. Again, it's about collaboration and communication and clear lines of authority. I think the board chair is there as a moderator or a mediator, and the ultimate decision maker within the board, depending on the articles of association for that particular organisation. So I think the board chair and the CEO have to have an excellent working relationship. Without that clear connection between the two, without that ultimate collaboration, you're fundamentally, whether the board is more proactive in setting strategy or more reactive in just approving strategy, you're always going to encounter some degree of conflict. So I think it's about the nature of the personalities, the desire and the drive to have collaboration, but also that clear line of communication between the two. It should be both formal and informal, because these are people who fundamentally drive the business from the board level, from the management level. So without a clear collaboration, without a partnership, these two cannot operate effectively. And any conflict between the board chair and the CEO, conflict for the entire organization. So it's clear that there should be good communication, excellent lines of communication between the two, excellent collaboration. And as I say, the board chair and the CEO should take time to ensure that they're very much aligned in terms of their approach and their thought process from initiation to implementation. And that comes with the nature of the characters, with clear lines of communication, and the ability to communicate outside of the boardroom, and a clear mandate for both the board, but also for the role of the chair within the board.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes to go. So very quickly, there are 3 more questions. The first one, David Osir asks, Director Darren, thank you so much for stressing the need for a board to be composed of diverse, competent professionals, because one of the biggest problems in organization is incompetent board, which then feel inferior to the management. Thus, the management overrun the board. Okay, that was a comment. Thank you, David.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on David's comment. I think he's absolutely right. Globally, I think we suffer from serious issues at a board level. But you also see organizations that's the smarter, more proactive organization, either having succession plans or development plans or recruitment plans for specific needs for their board membership. So they take time to assess those board members on an annual basis to ensure that their skill set remains relevant for the needs of the organization. So, for example, if we look at board roles currently, one of the key changes in board roles that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is IT. So, for example, there are risks associated with data protection, malware, ransomware. that we've seen globally and in Kenya quite recently. So I think it's very important that boards and management teams take time out on an annual basis to review and assess the needs of the business vis-a-vis the strategy and the rest of the obligations and responsibilities of the board, to ensure that those board members are up to date, are trained, or there is a succession plan in place to ensure that these board members are competent for the needs of the organisation of today. Sorry, it's quite a passion of mine, that one.
Very true. From Laban Omangi, thanks for the presentation. Speak to us briefly about the dynamics between group, subsidiary boards, and management in strategic planning.
Oh, subsidiary boards. Okay. Well, in terms of subsidiary boards and management, I don't think, honestly, there is a significant difference between the presentation and the slides there and a main board, if you like. The role of the subsidiary board is not a paper role where, or shouldn't be a paper role, where they're just signing off on either the requirements of the main board or the main group, and or signing off on what the management wants to do. I think they are there for a purpose, as an intervention to create some degree of separateness in the organizations. So their role shouldn't differ. They should still be involved in that strategic process, whether it be the proactive setting of strategy or the reactive approval of strategy. Then it's not a paper role. It's certainly a role where they should create some separateness between the main organization and the local organization, and play a leadership role in either setting strategy or approving strategy.
Okay, from Jeremiah Nyaberi, thanks for the good presentation. How does the board guard against individual interest that may blur the direction of the organization, especially in the public sector? SOEs.
Yes. Well, of course, I mentioned it in passing in one of the slides. The board has a fiduciary duty to the organisation that it works for. And one of those fiduciary duties is in respect of conflict of interest. Okay? So for me, it's a fundamental of a board member that there is no, either there is no conflict of interest, or it's a declared conflict of interest and then managed accordingly. I think there are measures and metrics and controls you can put in place with respect to conflict of interest without a doubt. So that can be measured on an annualized basis, or it can be declared or on an annualized basis, or each individual issue that arises can be declared. And then there can be steps put in place to ensure that that interest does not conflict with the decision making of the organization. So, for example, if somebody has a particular relationship with the CEO of a business which is a supplier of yours, then they should be exempt from those conversations relating to that individual supplier, by way of example, a very, very high level example. So I think we've got two areas. There are certain measures that a company can put in place to manage conflict of interest, but ultimately it's also on the director to live up to his fiduciary duties, to be honest in any particular interest he has. And again, that can form part of the annual review process for your directors in terms of performance. And obviously there should be a register put in place of any particular conflicts that an individual director may have, or interests that they may have. They should declare.
Well, thank you. 4 minutes to go. We have about 4 questions. So I'll just read them through all together, and then you can respond to them in one. So from Pius, great presentation, thanks. How can emerging issues be effectively accommodated in strategy execution? And then from Stephen, great presentation. With regards to disruption of business, how can the board leverage on emerging technologies, including AI, automation for real-time monitoring of strategy? From Dr. Edward Kobudi. How does your presentation change in times of crisis, especially steep decline of business? Those are the three questions. So I will give you a chance to respond to that. Then we able to.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. How can emerging issues be effectively accommodated in strategy execution? Well, that, and I mentioned it on a number of occasions because it is immensely valid, that strategy should be a regular agenda item on the board's agenda. And any new risks or issues that are emerging should be addressed within those regular board meetings. It should also be captured within any risk register if it's a risk or an issue that needs managing. So I think the solution to that is having a constant awareness of the external environment, the board directors being very familiar with the internal business itself and its way of operating, and ensuring that having strategy as a regular agenda item, these emerging issues are brought to the table and enabling the board to pivot on their decisions to ensure that they're capturing either the issue or the opportunity. But of course, balancing that against the longer term achievement of the strategy. So I think it's a matter of having the board directors being familiar with the business, keeping up to date with the external environment, having a regular board agenda item, and having the capability and capacity to pivot on decisions based on that knowledge of the external internal environment and an awareness of the issue because it's raised at the table and it's on that regular broad agenda. In terms of leveraging AI automation for real-time monitoring of strategy, there are tools available out there in the marketplace that use automation to manage and monitor strategy and strategy execution and implementation. They are relatively expensive, some of them are not so much so. But I think in today's modern era, and it's interesting we mentioned AI and automation, and I mentioned the emergence of IT and the likes of AI and automation as a board agenda item these days. There's quite an interesting divergence between the two. But there are tools available out there that you can incorporate within your system that give you real-time monitoring of strategy. As there are tools out there that automate the risk process, so the enterprise risk management process or your risk register. And I think the more real-time data a board has access to and takes note of, the more relevant and more pertinent and more effective the discussions are when strategy is on the agenda. So I think in an ideal environment, I would advocate and encourage people to look at automated solutions to monitoring the implementation and delivery on the strategy, as I would with risk and risk management also, because that enables the board to have real-time information and make current informed decisions that can better deliver on the strategy in the longer term. Last one, how does your presentation change in times of crisis, especially steep decline of business? Yeah, it does change. Well, it dependent on the role of the board in the first place. As I say, if the board is more proactive in setting strategy as a general principle, then having it on the board agenda on a regular basis enables them to manage that risk. But it doesn't mean that board members shouldn't be available in times of crisis for emerging meetings at a minute's notice, if necessary. The board has a specific role to play in strategizing over crisis management. If for no other reason than one of the board's key roles is to manage the relationship between the organization and the external audience, including the shareholders. So when there is an emerging issue, a crisis or a steep decline in the business, the board have to step up and play their role and live up to their responsibilities to manage that relationship with the shareholders and the external environment, but also to be able to sit down, have that strategy discussion with a view to pivoting on that strategy to mitigate the crisis or manage the decline. So I think it's a mixture of things. The board is critical in that. And I think that's certainly a position where the board, whether it's proactive or reactive, must step up and take a more proactive role in strategizing in times of crisis and in times of decline. I think that answers those questions, but we seem to have more. Or are they just comments?
Oh, there are some more, but most of them are comments. We won't take those for now. We'll have to end this. We'll invite my CEO, Mr. Meshach. But before I do that, I will really appreciate your presentation, Darren, and thank you for making time. Thank you, directors, for joining in. We have these virtual programs every month, and we invite you to join in for such insightful discussions. The next one will be on 27th of September, and it will be on Directors' Oversight in Effective Risk Management. Same time from 8 to 9. We try and make it as short as possible, and you're invited to join in as well. Please check out our events as well. The next coming one would be the Board Conflict Management and Mediation Approaches. It's a virtual program on 30th and 31st of this month. We look forward to you joining in. And also to mention, Darren also takes us through the Strategy Audit and Risk Oversight Workshop. We'll be having this in Naivasha. It's a 3-day program where he helps just bring out all the frameworks and try to align strategy, audit, and risk, and how the board can be able to take oversight on this. We're running a 50% discount for membership subscription renewal. Please take time to just be able to update your membership, and we'll be able to give you a recommendation letter and the certificate for the year 2023. Feel free to reach out to me, Joy Kakai. I'll be able to assist in whatever need you may have, any governance support, or any other service that you feel like the Institute will be able to assist. We're very much willing and ready to support you as directors. I'll hand it over to the CEO to close the session. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joy. And my sincere gratitude to Darren for the excellent job that you have done. As we come to the close of today's session, allow me also to just recognize some of our members who've been able to be with us. Thank you, Ambassador Mary Kimulu, for finding time to be with us. Engineer David Onyango, thank you very much. Dr. Edward Kobudi, who is also one of our facilitators, we also appreciate your presence. Rajiv Medirata, thank you for finding time. Dr. Jimmy Mwithi, among all the other members who've been able to find time to be present during this session. As Joy has indicated, we do this monthly series for information purposes to our members and to equip us with the necessary knowledge and information that we need even as we play our role as directors. I want to bring to your attention that we have recordings of all the sessions that we've done since March. In case you need any of the past recordings, the team will be available to share with you the links. Joy, I believe some of the recordings are also in our website, so members can also be able to access them from the website. And even for this particular one, the recording will also be shared with us. Before I close, I want to recognize the presence of one of our directors, Director Elizabeth Chengo. Elizabeth, maybe you can just unmute and very briefly say hi, and then we can close the meeting.
Thank you so much, CEO, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Bernadette, for that wonderful presentation. I take home a number of things, and I'm glad that we are growing our members with very critical information at this time. I love the two things that are quite critical: the composition of designing composition of the board members to align to the strategy. I think often, we have board compositions that don't align with the VUCA environment, technology matters, and the rest. and it becomes very challenging. And the other thing, of course, is to have the key performance indicators, the matrices that are relevant and are able to point to us the direction of the organizations we lead. So among, of course, very many other key items and things that we have learned. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for finding time to attend, and looking forward to continue growing ourselves to provide the services that are quite key to the sustainability of organizations. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Elizabeth, and members. Once more, thank you very much. Sorry, we've run our time a little bit. Our target is always to be through by 9 a.m. And with those closing remarks, I wish us the very best for the rest of the day, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.